Thank you for joining us. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Shigeru Iwakabe. He's got a PhD. He is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Ritsumeikan University in Osaka, Japan. Dr. Iwakabe conducts psychotherapy research on client emotional processes from an integrative perspective. His research interests include training and professional development in psychotherapy, case study research methods, psychotherapy integration, and cultural and social issues related to the practice of psychotherapy. He has written several articles, and he has also translated several major books on emotion-focused therapy into Japanese. Dr. Shigeru Iwakabe currently serves as a co-chair of research committee for the Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, or AEDP, which I'm very interested in, and I'm excited to talk with you about today because I've never talked with anyone about AEDP, and I've recently learned about it. So excited to talk about that. Yeah. And then last, Dr. Iwakabe serves as a member of Executive Committee for Japanese Association of Clinical Psychology, and he's also a committee member of several psychological associations. Dr. Iwakabe, thank you for joining me today, and I'm excited to have you on.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show.
Yeah.
It's great to meet you.
You too. I've been very excited to speak with you for some time. I was speaking with my wife about wanting to interview psychologists from different countries, and I lived in Japan for about 8 years, and my plan was always to come to America to get my degree and then try to go back to Japan, maybe as a contractor or something, and work and live back in Japan. So I'm excited to hear your experience and what it's like to be a psychologist in Japan. And
yeah. Oh, great. It'd be great to have you here.
Yes. Yeah, if you don't mind, can we start? Can you tell us about where your interest in psychology first began? Like when did you,
Yeah. I was a university student in Tokyo. I was studying economics, right? Because I guess that was what we were supposed to study if you're not in engineering, was the most kind of, popular thing at the time. And, I wasn't happy with, economics. I mean, it was back then, the Japanese economy was booming. And it was something, I wasn't that interested, but I just assumed that was something I should study. But as I was studying, I wasn't interested in, economics. But more than that, I was questioning the kind of the social climate back then, where, economic prosperity was believed to be something that would make you happy, something that would make everyone happy. In order to do that, in order to achieve that, people just study to go to good schools, get elite schools and all that. And, I really didn't like all that sort of the hype about the economy, the brand name stuff. And I was working as a private tutor for the, junior high school students and high school students and other parents, those kids who had parents so eager to have their kids go to a good school. And I go to their house and I teach. I see how kids are kind of, confused, suffering, but also family relationships that were really not in a good shape. So I started getting into really interested in psychology, the family relationship. I started reading, but back then the psychology was not really big in Japan. So, and I was also questioning, what's happening in Japanese society. And as a student, I traveled to US or Europe, and I decided to go to study at McGill University, because back then I was also interested in brain, And, Montreal, McGill University, is really known for that. Dr. Pingfield, and Hebbs and all these neurophysiological psychologists. So I went there, but I just, as soon as I arrived, I was not, I realized I wasn't made for sort of experimental psychology, and I wanted to work with people. So I went to counseling department and completed my doctoral degree there.
In counseling?
In counseling psychology, yes. So that was how it started.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How old were you when you were, let's say, how old were you, or around what year was it when you were studying economics and going to the houses, and then you started being interested in psychology?
1987, 88 to 1991.
Oh, okay.
So I think, and I went to Canada in 1991.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, you said that psychology wasn't really big in Japan. Has that changed up till now? Is psychology more popular in Japan now?
I think so. I was in Canada until 2000.
Oh,
But
9 years.
around 96, they started as, sort of first national kind of, the service system for school counselors.
Oh,
Even though Japanese clinical psychologists are called clinical psychologists, the first public psychological service given by government was given by Ministry of Education, and it's a school psychology or school counseling program because there's a lot of bullying, truancy, the problems in schools was kind of the major kind of social issue that brought psychology to the fore in Japanese society.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that establishment of that system really changed. So after 2000, Japanese psychology started to really grow
Okay.
rapidly.
So it was in 2000, is that when you returned to Japan?
Yes.
So you returned right as it was pretty much growing, huh? Good timing.
Right. I guess so.
And what did you, well, first, was it from 91 to 2000, you were in Canada for that 9 years. How much of those years were you studying for your doctoral degree, for your PhD?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't have a background in psychology because I studied economics, right? So I had to make up for some undergraduate credit to get accepted or to be eligible to apply for graduate school. So I had about 1 to 2 years in undergraduate, and then 2 years in masters, and then doctoral.
Oh, wow.
But there are a lot of times I don't know what I did, but I was a doctoral student, which means a good thing, right?
Yeah. I don't know if your experience lines up, but in my experience while I was in Japan, I would say that many Japanese people do not learn fluent English. And so when you went to Canada, did you already speak fluent English and you went and you learned psychology in English, or what was that like?
Right. I mean, when I was in university called Waseda, I made friends and I'm friends with some international students, and I loved traveling. So I learned English and that way. But when I actually went to Canada, I mean, I had enough TOEFL score, right? But I don't think I did well even in high school. Not even university, but the English I thought was good, but it was not enough to, get good grades. It was hard initially.
Yeah, and I imagine psychology has a lot of words that are very specific to psychology, and especially if you're learning about like, I don't know, they talk about like the first thought was like Freud and the ego and the id and the superego, or like, I don't know, it's just it's words that you don't use in everyday English, and so then you have to learn more like medical terms and
Right,
diagnoses and things, and write
right,
papers, all of the papers you have to write.
right. But, I mean, I think it's such an interesting thing because, the psychoanalysis, right?
Oh.
Japanese analyst translated Freudian terms in a very complicated Japanese term that never existed, which made it almost impossible to understand. So in some way, it wasn't more difficult to study in English because you have this kind of aversive reactions to complicated, Japanese words you have never seen, right?
Yeah.
English words, of course, you haven't seen it, so it's okay.
That makes sense.
So, and also, first main exposure, like big exposure to psychology for me was in English. So I think that made it okay. And and also I was young, so I could memorize better.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting because I recently read about how in German, Freud called the id, the ego, and the superego. The id was the it, the ego was I, and the superego was like above I. And
Right.
then when they that's super easy to remember if you're learning in German. And then when they translated it to English, they used Latin, which we don't really use Latin anymore. So it doesn't really feel as common or everyday speech. And then they translated it to Japanese, and it's even more complicated.
Right.
Yeah.
Freud, I mean, I'm not psychoanalyst, but I know that Freud used these terms to make it more familiar to you and understandable.
Yeah.
But somehow all these academic people made the opposite effort
Yeah.
to make it even harder.
Such a shame.
Right. I mean, it, id,
Uh-huh.
right, is like two syllables in English, right?
Oh.
In Japanese, it's made of three complicated Chinese characters.
Oh.
That would take, I don't know how many more seconds to write.
Yeah.
Weird thing.
Uh.
Yeah.
And okay, and so what studying counseling in Canada,
Mhm.
and learning psychology in like in English and maybe like a Western way of was it kind of like a client-centered approach, or what kind of approach did you learn through school?
Right. It's my, I went to McGill University counseling psychology programs.
Mm.
The professors there back then, they are more integrative. They had their home base, like, let's say psychodynamic or
Mm.
experiential, but they're more integrative and open to variety of approaches.
Mm.
So I was really interested in like learning more than, one approach,
Yeah.
different views. I valued, having different alternative views
Mm.
and the idea, that the approach is more for the a patient or the clients, what's good for them.
Mm.
I think, for psychologists to be able to be flexible
Mm.
and open to different interpretations and ideas
Mm.
is more important.
Mm.
So that was my take on it. But I was naturally drawn to experiential approaches and some psychodynamic approaches as well.
Mm. Okay. Um, when did you get? Well, I'll ask that in a little bit. So in Canada, so you finished your degree, and you went back to Japan, and then
Right,
where did your career start from there? What was it like in
right.
Japan?
This is interesting because we might have been able to meet in Okinawa because when I was in Canada,
Uh,
actually, my mother was sick, and I went back to Japan. And I thought I should think about the future, and I applied for the universities in Japan,
mm,
even though I wasn't really thinking about. Um, but then I applied to one in Sapporo and one in Okinawa,
uh,
and I got a call from a university in Sapporo, and so I decided to go there for a lot of reasons
mm,
what Hokkaido is famous for.
uh,
You know, the seafood, the beautiful, nature,
mm,
all that. But I was happy to have a job. Um, and I thought it would be a great change from being in Montreal
mm,
to, Japan.
yeah.
Yeah. So I went to Sapporo, and back then, because many universities in Japan are starting graduate school
Mm,
for they needed someone with a PhD who can supervise master's thesis and also train students with clinical skills.
mm.
So that was the start of my career.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you think about that?
I mean, as you probably felt when you went back to the States from Okinawa, it's a culture shock to go back to where you are, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Especially, to work in a new
Mm,
system.
mm, mm-hmm,
And, Hokkaido is a beautiful place, but I think the way people live is quite different from Tokyo.
uh,
It's more relaxed,
mm,
but the people do have different values. Yeah, I really enjoy being there, but it was very cold. I mean, Montreal was cold, but the Sapporo is also cold, and it's got so much snow. You're buried in the snow for about
mm,
3 months. But I still go there to teach. I was just there in the beginning of August
oh,
to teach intensive summer course. So I have been teaching there like every other year.
oh, okay.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
15 years. And I still enjoy it.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah.
Wait, so your first job there in Sapporo when you were, you know, helping out with like master's thesis and working with you said, and they had like a kind of a clinical program, like a training.
Right, right. They in year 2000 they started a graduate school in
Oh,
clinical psychology.
okay.
And in Japan, because of the establishment of that public service for school counselors,
Mm.
many graduate schools started around then.
Oh,
So because the Japanese psychologist needs a clinical psychologist. Their requirement is a master's degree.
mm,
So many universities started the graduate school master program in clinical psychology
mm.
around the year 2000.
Oh, okay.
And only in like 5 years or so, I think like hundreds of schools were, established
Oh,
around
wow.
that.
Yeah.
It was an economic boom, I guess.
And what was it like for you to teach like counseling to
Mm,
students in Japan?
right. I mean,
Yeah.
that was also a very, like a new learning or
Uh,
to now see how Japanese psychologists and students learn psychology.
mm,
I mean, first of all, I mean, there are many stories, I can remember, but it was such a strange thing. It was like disorienting in many ways. For example, the client-centered, therapy value sort of egalitarian relationship, right? The equal status between the therapist and the client, genuine relating, right? The openness, but there's a formality in Japanese relationship. And there's that hierarchy in Japanese, social relationship. So these really, I thought, were obstacles to learn the most simple counseling relationship in Japan.
Yeah.
Even though some people seem to do it well and some people seem to get it, but it just was so counter to learning counseling. I just want to say just one more thing, which is still like, one of the things that I struggle every day in teaching psychology.
Okay.
I think many Japanese people still to this day learn that listening quietly and looking like they're interested and looking like they're good students will make them good students and good learners. But in psychology, especially in clinical work, spontaneity is very important. Being able to express your ideas, whether it's correct or not, but just being able to take a chance and say what's on your mind is part of, emotional awareness and also the, expressive capacity that you need as a therapist. These things are not valued, have not been valued, and they are tend to be more passive and quiet, and it makes it very difficult for them to learn, because it's not just learning skills, it's like a change in the value system and a change in the basic kind of, automatic behavioral patterns that they have.
Yeah.
Of being a passive, a good, modest person to be more actively involved.
So I have several questions. But one, to pick up kind of where you left off, you mentioned it's not just a change in and it's not just a simple change, but it's a change in their value, like their value system and the way that they see social interactions in the world almost.
Right.
We're taught a lot that working with people from different cultures, we have to be very careful not to impose our own values on our clients, or like Western values on clients from a different cultural background. And so how much of it is this is the way psychotherapy works and it has to be this way, to like how much of it can be adapted to fit their values already?
Right. I mean, that's an interesting question. And I have written a paper called Cultural Accommodation of Psychotherapy.
Oh, okay.
But, because many early Japanese psychotherapists were always interested in modifying parts of Western psychotherapy models to meet Japanese needs, like culturally modifying parts of it so that it goes well with Japanese cultures. But that goes two ways, right? Because I think it can really, sort of, cherish Japanese cultural values, and make psychotherapy more effective or more suited for Japanese people. Or that kind of modification can spoil what that psychotherapy is.
Yeah.
Just to meet and even reinforce social oppression that might be happening in Japan based on a single therapist's personal opinion of what the culture is and what important values are. So I think it's very important that, psychotherapy that really doesn't fit Japanese culture is not directly or, without any kind of deep thinking, just applied, as it is to Japanese clients. But at the same time, what kind of adjustment that we make is important, not just that we make adjustment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I do. What do you think? I mean, you are here, you're in Okinawa, and Okinawa is a quite accommodating people who would, welcome new kind of ideas and influences to their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very accommodating. I don't know for sure. I like that answer. It's I think in everything there's a cost benefit analysis that we need to make. And a lot of times, they say like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. A lot of times we try to do things because we have good intentions, but we don't know what we're throwing away in the
Right,
meantime.
right.
And I was gonna ask, and is here, I think that a lot of the younger, my age and younger generation, were a lot more open to therapy than maybe my parents or grandparents would have been.
Right.
Do you see similarly in Japan, like either more open to therapy or more open to maybe an experiential type of therapy and less authority and less more equal, more egalitarian?
Right. I do think so. I
Mm.
really do think that's very much changing.
Okay.
Um, but I think that the traditional, more, non-egalitarian or authoritarian style,
Mm.
it's still very powerful and still, you know, sought by lots of people
Mm.
because it gives a sense of comfort,
Uh-huh.
that kind of authority, do this or don't do this,
Mm.
a direct, simple advice
Yeah.
from a parental figure
Yeah.
who Japanese people call sensei, right?
Uh,
A
Sensei.
sensei could be politician or teachers or doctors or whoever is in power,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. See, my thinking is that the way that we're taught psychology, like maybe here in America, especially, or in Canada or something, is that people want a direct answer, like you said, because it's a comfort, and if they have a direct answer, my thinking is that, well, then if it doesn't go well, they have someone that they can blame, or they have someone that they don't have to own up to the mistake or the guilt that comes from the
Mm-hmm.
failure. And the way that we would do it is like, no, maybe you have the answer. I believe that you know what's right to do, and I believe that you can do that. And you put the kind of the responsibility on the client, and you try to help them become more of an individual and less dependent on authority figures.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but and then is that more of a Western value, like becoming an individual or separating from authority figures? Um,
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I do see what you mean. But, for example, like client-centered therapy,
Hmm.
which is probably, one therapy that really tries to do what you are saying, right?
Uh-huh.
To be non-directional, to be, empathic, to be valuing and prizing of the client
Hmm.
so that the client, him or herself, is able to value, I mean, their own experiences
Hmm.
to guide their decisions, to, base their actions on their thoughts and feelings. And the client-centered therapy was like the therapy for university counseling center for many years. And it still is very strong. And I think the Japanese therapists do have that ideal as well.
Okay.
But they also tend to value another opposing or contradictory idea that, but if you try to make decisions, if you press your opinion too much, you wouldn't be liked by other people. So, balancing the two is more important.
Good balance.
The idea, like how to fit in, how to serve social needs, how to be a part of society. That's sort of, I think the Japanese therapists do not ignore the individual needs and self-actualization, but they really are more contextual, but more contextual than they realize. That famous saying about the nail that stands out get hit in Japanese society, and squeaking floors get waxed. What is that? But anyway, so I think the Japanese psychotherapist or psychologist, sort of like the systemic thinking and the idea of fitting in, two huge things.
Yeah.
I wonder if I don't know if this is a direction you want to take, but in last 20 years, Japanese psychology has shifted its focus to developmental disorders. Especially people are really interested in, sort of like autism, but milder one, like Asperger, because that, it's very common, right? I mean, in Japan with small kids, but also those people with Asperger's are somehow represented as kind of people who are not good for the Japanese, fabric of Japanese society, because they don't respond to social cues. They don't fit in. They cannot create and maintain interpersonal relationship. They can follow the rules, like unwritten rules of, interpersonal situations. So it's been a big social issues, and whatever's written on Asperger's, sometimes I, tend to think that value is reflected, and overemphasis or almost kind of obsessive kind of interest on Asperger's somehow makes me think this is not a psychological issue as much as a social issue, a value issue. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes, I believe. So you're saying that and maybe in your opinion, Japanese people, by and large, in general, they have they value social conformity, and they value cohesion and everyone getting along and turning the gears, making the society work. And people who are out of place, they're the ones who get picked on, or they're the ones who get put down, or they're the ones who get maybe in trouble. Like you said, like the nail that sticks out is the one that gets hit. So everyone tries to blend in, look the same, be the same. And so people with developmental disorders like Asperger's or autism, because society is so valued and so societal relations, and they have trouble, like the very essence of Asperger's and autism as trouble with social cues and social relations, that Japanese psychologists are kind of almost obsessively trying to figure out how to fix
Mm-hmm.
that problem.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, I can just have a list of examples like that. But I don't know if you have heard this expression in Japanese called 空気が読めない, which means that someone who cannot read the air, meaning that someone who cannot, understand or perceive interpersonal message or read between the line. So reading the air, I guess reading between the line. And I don't know when, but people make fun of those people who can't read between the line, and they became the target of ridicule as well as, I don't know, socially accepted, microaggressions like, oh, so and so cannot read the air, you know, because they can't interpersonally function well. So, another example would be Hikikomori, which is, now internationally known. The people who are socially withdrawn, people who stay home and, wouldn't participate in a social, I don't know, whatever, work or, school. There are millions of Japanese people, and it's not just the young people. One of the main portion of Hikikomori people are people in 40s and 50s, right? And I think now the treatment is more psychological, but the many treatments tend to be more kind of re-education, kind of corrective, things that are not based on psychological principles, but more of, I don't know, it's re-education almost, like a discipline. So, yeah, there's that element.
Yeah. What do you think the answer is to that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? Because I myself didn't like the kind of a conformity in Japanese society. There are also visible kind of conformity, right? I mean, people wearing suits. It's so visible, like, if you're in Shinjuku Station or Marunouchi Station, I don't know, I mean, the main business area, the Wall Street or whatever, the downtown of Tokyo, 9 a.m. in the morning, everyone's walking in the same direction, same pace, wearing the same suits. And if you try to walk on, or Shinjuku Station or whatever, if you try to walk on a different pace, you can't, because it's like a river of people. So practically speaking, going in the same direction and being, conforming or to whatever's happening is adaptive in many ways, right?
Yeah.
And it has to be the way. And I mean, that's a visible part. But there are also many invisible conformity that people feel like you have to do, or you have to live this way, or you have to behave this way. And some of those customs or invisible conformity really create something great in Japanese society, but also really creating or contributing to kind of suffocating kind of environment that, even though some people realize, but other people don't realize, as if you're like climbing up the mountains and it's just it starts to, becomes hard to breathe, but
Mm,
you're kind of slowly getting used to, so you don't know how hard it is
mm,
actually to breathe anymore.
mm.
Mm.
It sounds almost kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong, but um, I had some Japanese friends and they did not learn to speak English. And I asked them, why didn't you ever want to learn English? And they said, like, this is Japan. If people want to come visit Japan, they should speak Japanese. And they didn't have any interest in traveling really to other countries. So I know a lot of people kind of that mindset, and that maybe that's kind of maybe like more conservative. Like we have our traditions, our customs, our
Mm,
own all of these things that we need to keep.
mm,
And it reminds me in America for a long time, you used to hear like very conservative white people maybe would say like, "This is America, speak English," like not Spanish or something. And now I think America is going through a big shift, and people are trying to better understand how to how to live in America, and especially accept all these different cultures and not be so conservative, maybe be a little more balanced. Um,
yeah.
would you say that that's kind of how you, in some ways, you would hope Japan takes that type of path where like you keep certain traditions and customs, but maybe the ones that are not doing much good anymore, you kind of shed those off, or
Yeah, I keep thinking about it. I don't have the answer, like what
mm,
kind of direction or path we are taking.
mm,
But, Daniel, I do remember the time when, sometimes when I come back from Canada and some of my friends or some people are so proud of Japan
uh-huh,
and they don't even speak English. They don't go outside Japan. So they live on this tiny little island
mm,
on the globe. But when they say that, we are the best, or, this is the best thing, like, and
mm,
also people need to speak Japanese if they're here. I think that is the kind of, I don't know, coming from the oppression almost, sort of like, it's not a statement of underlying happiness,
mm,
but it's a statement of reflecting underlying uh, oppression
mm,
and kind of not having power.
uh-huh, mm,
Uh, I do feel sad. I used to feel angry
no,
when I hear that,
mm,
like, oh, you don't know anything outside here, and there are so many great things, and
mm,
it's like it's so it's it made me angry that they don't want to learn
mm,
and respect something different.
uh-huh,
I think that's still there in some way, but it does make me feel, I mean, more sad than angry now
mm,
that they are so closed. They are so, they kind of gave up learning
yeah,
something different,
yeah,
and they feel that they have to follow, and this is the best.
mm,
It's kind of like the sign that they stopped growing
mm,
or thinking.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, very, very complicated, very interesting.
Yeah, very complicated social issue
Yeah.
when people come to that sort of idea.
Mm, mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, I was gonna ask with in a like I said, I think the younger generation is getting better, but generally speaking, I think in America, um, it's kind of like it's kind of people kind of make it into a joke now that like guys don't like to talk about their feelings, and and so when you do therapy with guys, they're more like I want to fix it. What's the content, not what's happened, not the feelings involved.
Yeah, yeah.
And And I don't know, with you being interested in experiential therapy, that's very, what are you feeling? How does it feel to feel what you're feeling? Like the meta
Yeah,
process. Yeah.
yeah, I'm very interested. Even though I don't write about it, but when I do therapy and I
Mm,
work with, both, I have more female clients than male clients, but I do work with male clients.
uh,
And um, it's a very interesting issue, the gender and emotional experience and emotional expressiveness, right?
uh-huh.
Because boys don't cry.
Yeah.
It's such a big thing. And I think that in Japan, the boys aged between 12 and 25, crying is not the sign of the sadness or expression of sadness, but the crying is the defeat.
Mm,
It's humiliating
hmm.
and it's so difficult. So, I mean, for many people, they would never let other people see their tears,
Mm,
but it's much worse for the people in 40s, 50s, or even 60s.
mm,
There's a lot of, I mean, you spoke to Les,
uh-huh.
so you talked about the emotions, but Japanese people tend to have a lot of social emotions
Mm,
or so-called instrumental emotions. They tend to show what's socially acceptable,
mm,
but really getting to what they really feel when the feelings are not socially, uh, you know, I mean, not considered good feelings,
uh-huh.
like, say anger or disgust and all other nasty ones. They don't want to show.
Mm.
They don't want to admit, or it's hard for them to show in therapeutic relationship for sure.
Yeah.
So we need to be aware. And another thing, can I add,
Yes.
is one of the emotions that I've been interested in studying is shame.
Mm,
Shame is such a, I mean, so-called emotion that Japanese people are fixated with.
mm,
So I have been interested in shame. Um, but shame is associated with many kind of psychological pathology. Is often considered as sort of one of the worst emotion, but the people don't want to talk about shame because there's a shame about
talking about.
shame,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But in Japan, shame is often considered as socially good emotion, right?
Mm, mm,
Not the emotion, not the shame as sort of very painful sort of core shame, but a sense of shame.
mm.
Having a sense of shame, consciousness of yourself from other people's point of view is considered very important.
Mm. Yeah. In preparation for interviewing you, I did get around to reading two articles that you've written.
Uh,
And one of them was,
Thank you.
yes, yes. One of them, you wrote an article titled "Working with Social Withdrawal or Hikikomori in Japan from Shame to Pride." Um, and when I talked with Dr. Greenberg, he was talking about replacing emotion with emotion. And
Right.
is that your approach with hikikomori? Is that maybe they predominantly feel shame and you're trying to, I read, so the case study in that article, you worked with a man named Ken,
Right.
and it was very interesting to read, very, I think, very brilliant work. And I saw how you tried to point out, oh, so you did this, and it took strength to do that, and you tried to point out his strengths and like a strength-based approach. And so were you trying to gear him more toward pride instead of feeling the shame? Or yeah, can you talk about that?
Right, right. I mean, yeah, I think that was like one of my interests, and I always wanted to write about,
Uh,
some of the work that, I do, and but also, writing about the shame and how shame is addressed in therapy.
mm,
I think with many people that we see, and also in my research, I have a research, psychotherapy research on transforming shame, a
uh,
past shameful experience.
mm,
We work to transform shame. I think the pride is the opposite of shame in many ways, right? Because
mm,
you're ashamed of yourself to you're confident and you're proud of
mm,
who you are. But in this process, we need a different emotional experience
mm,
to get to a pride. Sometimes it is really expressing anger, experiencing anger, and being able to express anger. It's not me, but it's them.
mm,
I was, I didn't do it. It's not my fault. To really kind of push the blame out of yourself.
mm,
And that kind of process is very important. For even for Hikikomori people, this
mm,
is social system that's messed up, or
mm,
this is a social system that is not good for me.
uh-huh,
And it was forced on me.
uh-huh,
It's not because I'm weak that I'm at home.
uh-huh,
It is just not good for me. It's not for me.
mm,
So, you know, um, anger as an emotion
mm,
helps getting rid of what you don't like from inside outside, but more importantly, to say no, to protect yourself, to draw
mm,
boundaries.
mm,
So in Japanese clients, being able to express anger without worrying about how society or others would perceive you, to be able to feel, in the safety of therapeutic relationship,
mm,
all the physical energy that comes with anger,
mm,
that gives a sense of power, the strength, excitement, energy.
mm,
That's very important.
mm,
So transforming shame involves like anger or sometimes sadness of losing the dream that you had,
mm,
all different kinds of emotions, but experiencing all kinds of emotions, changing emotion with another emotion
mm,
is a great idea.
oh,
And, I'm thankful to Les for
uh-huh.
articulating such an interesting principle of change.
It's very interesting, yes.
Mhm.
Um, I see, I wonder, you talked about you didn't really grow up liking the conformity aspect of Japan, and then you mentioned with Hikikomori, like they kind of sometimes feel like society placed this on me and mold I have to fit into society and I'm not really interested in that. So it makes sense that you might resonate with their thinking in a lot of ways.
Right, right.
Mm,
And also I just realized, what influenced me a lot was, seeing um, my personal kind of observation about how shame played a
mm,
huge role in Japanese society,
uh,
I think.
uh,
And, through my, seeing through my parents and, in everyday life,
mm.
that really you know, um, stimulated me
Mm.
in many ways. Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Like what?
Right.
Why? Yeah.
You know, like, for example, my parents,
Mm.
they grew up in wartime.
Oh.
So, they had no food or, many of people, I guess, had a lot of secrets.
Mm.
Not because they, did something horrible, but because of the circumstances. They did a lot of things that they didn't want to do,
Mm.
or they were in a situation where they, you know, I mean, they weren't able to um, do what they were supposed to do, or
Mm.
anyway.
Uh-huh.
So, my parents also had a lot of secrets. For example, my father dropped out of high school, but he never told anybody.
Uh,
But I mean, dropping out of high school back then, really was just a natural thing because they had to move to another city because they had no food,
mm.
and the school was just not,
Mm.
something that was important. But he would hide this,
Uh,
and for many years, right? I mean, but then my mother also has a lot of secrets, and so I think I lived in this sort of like a hidden shame and
mm.
family, and I also hear a whole bunch of stories like these. But also, I see how shame in in Japanese society is used as a way of social control.
Oh.
Like, if you see kids crying in the park or on the train, the mother would say to the kid, other people are looking at you.
Mm.
They think you're a sissy.
Uh,
Or it's unsightly, or
uh-huh.
like, oh, it's embarrassing.
Uh-huh.
So they would um, sort of work on shaming you. I
Mm.
know how shame, and shaming is such a problematic thing in many society, but in Asian society, shaming is still used as a casual and predominant social control
Mm.
in so many ways.
Yeah.
And we are shaming each other, one another all the time without saying a word by just the gaze, or you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You were here.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never really thought about it that way before. That's
Mhm.
I'm sure by the time you get to do therapy with a lot of people, there's a lot of shame to be worked through, huh?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this ad
Mm.
on Japanese metro. I think it's on the internet, but
Mm.
there's a series of very funny ad on a Tokyo Metro
Oh.
called Please do that in your home or in your room. And it's like a cartoon of a woman putting a makeup on the train,
Uh,
and or like a couple holding each other's hands, or I don't know, anyway, eating on the subway.
mm.
But the whole, please do that in your home
Yeah.
ad campaign is like a shaming campaign. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you to do that on the, it's like nuisance. It's
Mm.
other people will be uncomfortable.
Mm.
So there's a lot of shaming that's used, um, maybe in a clever way, but also in a way of,
Yeah.
contributing to people developing, more shame
Mm.
to inhibit them from being more expressive,
Mm.
feeling free.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the conformity has a lot to do with shame as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's tough because, you know, I think by and large, if I was in, let's say, Shibuya or Tokyo at an intersection and I lost my wallet, chances are that someone would turn my wallet into the police station and I would get it and everything would still be in there. But if I lost my wallet in New York City, chances of me getting it back are very, very low. And or just like you go to Japan, and if you go to a bathroom in Family Mart or something, it is very, very clean 100% of the time. But if you
Mm-hmm.
go to a bathroom here in America at a gas station, the chances of it being clean is very low. And so I can see why like there's so many good things that come from that, but I can also it's not just it's I can see how much bad will come from that and how much weight people carry around if they make a mistake. I don't know a great lot about Freud, but I know he would call it like a harsh superego, and it's just like it's the voice in your head saying like you made a mistake. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should,
Right.
yeah.
The shame, superego. It's interesting because I think that we need someone can make in social psychology can do an experiment,
Oh,
about people using bathroom,
huh.
cleanly for whatever reasons. Is it because of
Mm,
shame,
mm,
empathy? What are the reasons why that is. And
uh-huh.
I do like Japan for this, for the reasons,
Mm.
for that reason, that public bathroom is a place, safe place.
Yeah.
It's like one thing to have a sense of safety in
Mm,
terms of, not being attacked.
mm.
But I think there's something like bathroom safety, right?
Uh-huh.
You can go to bathroom and it's clean,
Yeah.
and that's special.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a
Yeah.
lot of people here in America that don't use public restrooms.
I know it is horrible. It is hard. Yeah, I don't know why it has to be so hard to keep the bathroom, in a usable condition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
without, that's another thing I'm interested in. Disgust,
Oh.
the emotion of disgust as well, how that
Mm,
functions socially.
mm,
Because I think the sense of disgust is like somehow very strong
mm.
here.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Yeah, going back to I think I might be wrong, but it might be this guy named Jonathan Haidt. I think he's looked into temperament or personality styles and conservatives versus liberals in America. And um he was saying that by and large conservatives show disgust, the emotion of disgust much more than liberals do.
Mm.
And so I wonder if Japan is more of a conservative country, how much more disgust you'll find
Mm.
in the general population like that.
That's interesting. Yeah. I wonder if maybe there are already experiments or the research that's being
Mm.
done here on the same idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Can you, so one of my professors here at my university, she is very interested in AEDP,
Right.
and
I can read her.
I yeah, I read she gave me a book on by Diana Fosha on AEDP, and I read the book and I found it very, very interesting. And she goes to some workshops and stuff sometimes. She wants to get certified um
Right.
down the line, but yeah, can you tell me, for a lot of people are not going to know about AEDP, so can you kind of tell us what it is and how you heard about it and got interested in it?
Right. Right. I mean, ADP or accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy,
Mm.
right?
Huh.
Is, integrative affect focused therapy, originally, based on intensive short-term dynamic therapy
Mm,
of Habib Davenlu,
mm,
who had a very kind of confrontational style of intervention, but at the same time, the precision that he worked with was really admired.
mm,
But short-term dynamic psychotherapy was very special because they videotape. their sessions, and we see the dramatic change that their patients go through within a matter of 1 hour. But Diana Fosher replaced that confrontational style with more empathic, affirming style. Instead of pressuring the clients with confrontation or challenge, she would empathize, very deeply, so that her patients will be able to open up and reach that depth of emotional experience. ADP is somewhat different from EFT in that it's more relational, attachment-based, and it also emphasizes the processing or addressing positive emotional experience, not just focusing on the problems or the distress and suffering, but ADP really addresses the positive emotional experience as systematically and as rigorously as negative emotions. You're smiling.
Oh no, that's cool. I like that.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I was making sense, but
no, yeah, you are.
It's not just really addressing and overcoming or working through the negative emotions, but their clients or the patients are able to make use of their positive psychological resources or emotional resources. One of the idea that's very important in ADP is called receptive affective capacity, which means you are able to receive other people's care, support, empathy, love, receptive capacity, right? Because if you are to feel good, it's not that you feel horrible, but being able to make use of what's given to you so that they become kind of like a nutrition, emotional nutrition. So that's what ADP is. I don't know if I did the justice to the complexity of its theory and practice, but that's how I understand.
I like that. I really, in my own personal goals, I want to get better with positive reinforcing positive emotion and like a strengths-based approach to therapy. Can you give me an example kind of how you might go about really focusing on the positive aspect of emotions and not just the negative?
Right. Well, one of the for example, like one of the studies that we are doing focuses on the first session of psychotherapy in ADP. First session in ADP. The first session is often considered as sort of like intake or informational session almost, right? The client's talking about what's troubling them, and you are there to understand, the problem, the situation, and what contributed to the problem while establishing a good relationship. ADP does all that, but it also focuses on any signs, positive signs, the strengths, the sign of resilience. For example, like if the client says, I'm so depressed and I don't, I don't see any hope in here, but I really want to get, back to my life. That single statement, I really want to, do this. That's a sign of the strength in the midst of all the suffering and distress. But it's a little bit of something, but it's still a sign of the strength and the positivity in clients. So you don't want to focus, you don't want to miss that, but you should be able to pick it up, help the client to expand it, to really feel it,
mm,
to really get in touch with the a tiny island of positivity in the ocean of all the negatives that's going on.
uh-huh.
In ADP, that's called glimmer of transformance.
Okay.
Sort of like a glimmer, a tiny glimmer of strength or, desire to grow.
Mm,
So being able to pick up both is important.
mm.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So in ADP, they have identified a series of unique emotion called transformational affects.
Okay.
Transformational affects are the emotions that happened when you experience change. For
Mm,
example, I mean, when you succeed, you feel like, yeah, I did it. That
mm,
sense of mastery,
mm.
you're transformed by this success. So it's called mastery affect.
Ah,
Or when you realize something, you have realization affect. That's emotion, aha experience, right?
ah,
Oh,
uh-huh.
this is what I mean. That sense of excitement and mastery, or sometimes you have this feeling called healing affect. Healing affect is like, well, thank you for helping me. That kind
Mm,
of like feeling touched, moved, a sense of gratitude. So in ADP, when you see those emotions,
mm.
you help your clients savor those emotions, feel more of it,
Ah,
feel, really just absorb what it is like, just so that it becomes a part of yourself. Feel it, reflect on it,
mm,
savor it, and really consolidate as a part of yourself.
mm.
That's another kind of work with positive emotions.
That's really neat. I I like all of like how you said if you have a client who is saying like I'm really depressed, but I'm here, I want to get better, especially during an intake or something. Um, Instead of just blowing by like, yeah, I understand and we're gonna try to help you. And one of the ways that we can help you is to get more information. So can you like instead
Yeah,
of
yeah,
doing it's and I feel like it's very easy to do. It's very we're taught we're taught to look for symptoms,
right,
and then we're taught to look for these symptoms and to make a diagnosis.
right.
And so we're looking for the negative things. And so we hear the word I'm depressed, and then
Mm,
everything after that is just kind of like, oh, okay, well, we're gonna, but you just
mm,
missed a great opportunity to say, like, you are here. And a lot of people would have never walked through these doors, and that shows a lot of strength on your part. And
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Like, I mean, exactly. I like what you said because the first of all, like, if the client he comes to your office saying, I'm so depressed.
Mm,
I'm, I just can't do anything.
mm,
In spite of that depression, in spite of that deeply depressed state, you came all the way here to
mm,
see me. So even in that statement, you feel this sense of, I don't know, I want to get better, or
mm,
that effort,
yeah.
that drive to do something. So being able to see the other side
Mm,
of that statement, I'm so depressed, I can't do anything.
mm,
You're here.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. And so how did you hear about AEDP?
Uh, well, yeah, I mean, when I was in Montreal,
Oh,
I did my internship at the Montreal General Hospital where Habib Davinlu was
oh,
doing his short-term dynamic psychotherapy.
oh.
So I was exposed to short-term dynamic psychotherapy
Mm,
then, and I saw Diana's book,
mm,
and I read the preface or forward where she talked about her experience.
mm,
I really resonated. But several years later, I saw her work at the Society for SEPI meeting, which is the SEPI is a Society for Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration.
Okay.
It's an international organization for psychotherapy integration. Diana presented her work, showed her clinical work, the videotapes. And I thought, wow, this is so great. And then I took some courses, but, as a researcher, I really wanted to study ADP. So I went to Diana and said, I wanted to study. And so that's how I started getting involved.
Okay.
But, and meanwhile, I was so interested in EFT and, I was interested in emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there, where the university that I'm going to right now, they're heavy on CBT. You find every once in a while, my supervisor, she jokes because she's psychodynamically oriented, but she likes like the AEDP, and she jokes that it's kind of like people come up to her and they're like, "Hey, I heard you like psychodynamic therapy. Like, can we talk?" Like, so I've any type of learning that I've done about EFT or AEDP has kind of been self-taught, and so I'm still trying to learn a lot about that. Yeah. I'm also very interested in I really liked Carl Jung, and I saw in one of your, I think it was the article on psychotherapy integration in Japan.
Right.
You mentioned that there was kind of a Jungian thought, or Jungian therapy had kind of an influence in Japan. I forget, the last name was Kawai.
Yes.
Yes. Um, and I got really excited. I was reading your article and I saw that, and then I looked him up. I had never heard of him before, and I saw that he wrote books on myths, like in Japanese myths and fairy tales, and interpreting them from a Jungian perspective. I thought that was very interesting. Have you read his works, and do you have any interest in that area?
Well, yeah, I am interested. I think I'm interested in two ways. Is that, one is that, I was interested originally because it feels like his work is so important and interesting, but also I think it has a lot to do with the sort of the sense of nationalism, the kind of asserting a Japanese uniqueness. So it is more of a cultural studies, interest. So some of it is very interesting, and it may reflect the Japanese psyche. But the whole notion of thinking about the Japanese psyche is not subject matter of psychology, but subject matter of nationalism. You know what I mean? This distinguishing Japanese from other Asian group, sort of that sort of idea as rise of nationalism rather than, I don't know, the inquiry in psychology.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? So cultural uniqueness of Japanese people. But some of the materials are just genuinely interesting. He's a very good writer. I think he's Joseph Campbell of Japan.
Oh, cool.
And he speaks, his lectures are interesting. He's an interesting person, and what he writes captures, sort of like Japanese social issues very well. And he has a manner of addressing problems, empathy, and the kindness.
Yeah.
not just a one-way criticism from academic point of view.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very interested to learn more about him.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
in that article, you talked about some of the ways that there has been accommodations for therapy in Japan. And one of those, what you talked about, parallel therapy with mother and child.
Right.
I was just curious. Um, I was curious about, so you can kind of fill me in where I'm wrong and then maybe respond. But so parallel therapy with mother and child, from what you wrote, it seems as if one of the ways that you can be accommodating in Japan is you do therapy not only with the child or adolescent, but you do the therapy with the mother as well. And it can be separate. It can be like on the same day, but an individual session with the mom, the mother, and then it has a few benefits, like she can kind of receive individual therapy in that time, and she can also you can provide psychoeducation to her on parenting and maybe what her child's going through and stuff like that. Um, Earlier in the article, or maybe it was the article on social withdrawal with Hikikomori, you talked about um, distant fathers or fathers who are, you know, they're emotionally distant, they're working, they're at the office. So I was wondering, with parallel therapy, are fathers in Japan involved very much in their children? Is doing parallel therapy with fathers, is that something like, if you provided psychoeducation to the father, was like, children need their fathers and need someone to look up to model, like, yeah, kind of, is that happen, or is does it not?
Very rare.
Mm,
Very rare. But we do see sometimes the father being, taking more active role in the family,
mm,
realizing that, his wife is troubled and he needs to come with them.
mm,
But the reality, I think the majority of cases, it's just a mother bringing the child to
mm,
therapy, and the therapist finding it's not just the child, but the mother is also,
yeah,
a part of the problem,
uh,
while never really contacting the father
mm,
about anything at all.
mm.
Mm,
And how much, so in my own personal my very short experience of doing therapy, I see a lot of, it's either the mom brings the children, and
mm,
then you hear that there's also problems with the father, and then you ask, do you think that you could get the father to come too, and we can do kind of like a family session? And it's usually, oh, the father has no interest in therapy, and the father doesn't even want us to be here, or we don't tell the father that we're here because he wouldn't approve. So we even see that a lot here, I think.
mm.
um and so, yeah, it seems like a lot of times maybe the mother is having trouble, but part of it's because the father, like the marriage, and
Right.
yeah.
I think so. I think that's the truth.
Hmm,
And but I also recognize that sort of the family structure was not only normal,
hmm,
but kind of, almost like recommended or desirable kind of a family system is in 1970s and 1980s, where the father worked
uh,
and never home,
uh-huh,
and the mother did all the household work,
uh-huh,
including parenting. That
yeah.
was the ideal family structure, right? Back
Yeah,
then.
yeah, yeah, very different times.
Actually, yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. um I wanted to ask too, so let's see, in your article titled Psychotherapy Integration in Japan, you
Mm,
stressed nonverbal tasks like sandbox techniques.
right.
um And so you write in there, the popularity of sandbox techniques is reflective of the clinical reality of working with Japanese patients many of whom are often not comfortable discussing personal problems or verbally expressing their feelings in a face-to-face encounter. And I was reading your case study with Ken in the article on social withdrawal on the other one, and a lot of the, maybe this is a very specific case, but a lot of the interactions that you had with Ken, it was very very verbal oriented, or you would provide maybe empathic reflections or restatements. So is that kind of, is there a balance? Is it like 50-50? Like some clients are just completely nonverbal, like Sandbox is best, and some clients like Ken, he seemed like he was pretty in touch with his emotions. So maybe he was better talking through things.
This is something that, thank you for reading that article. And it was written maybe 2010 or before that, right? So I wasn't really interested in those nonverbal techniques then. I thought that might be helpful, but that couldn't be central to psychotherapy because, it might help, but, you really need to talk about the problem. You need to be, talk directly about the problem. I mean, that has, that way you can overcome the avoidance, you can overcome the fear of, whatever that is. And you can develop emotional awareness. And by having symbolic control or grasp by language, you can think about it. So it is a very important process, I think, to be able to talk.
Okay.
But still, I think that the Japanese therapists say, sometimes it's not necessary or it's not good talk. I don't agree with the idea. But I do see more of the benefit of being able to draw or, do something, but not being able to talk about it or directly deal with it. For example, like, exercise has a very good effect on depression. And just the reason for that is physiological and all that, but there's a little talking in there.
Yeah, that's a good example.
So, but somehow I seem to have a more positive view of the exercise than some of those techniques. But I am more open now.
Okay.
But I still think that talking is more important, and I think that the overemphasis on nonverbal technique come from a period of Japanese history where many people had the social anxiety and talking was just difficult.
Yeah.
Time has changed.
Okay, yeah. Do you have a group of other Japanese psychologists that you agree with you, that you all kind of get together and discuss these types of things?
Yeah, we created Japanese kind of society for psychotherapy exploration, psychotherapy integration. That people from different orientation, interested in learning from other approaches, get together and talk about it instead of a single group of cognitive behavior therapists gathering with other cognitive behavior therapists and talking about cognitive behavior therapy, but just, really learning from other approaches. So yeah, that's there, and they just made the academic association, which is great.
Okay.
But I think that I share more my I share more common interest with the people from, I don't know, various places or countries.
Yeah.
And I do really enjoy international collaboration, not because it's international, but you are able to, share common interest, learn from each other,
Yes.
different way of working, different
Yeah.
way of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really neat that I admire your openness, for first of all, and I think it's really neat that you love to travel and you learned English and you went to Canada and you learned psychology from a Western country, and I know you talked about you felt like angry for a time with the way that you saw Japanese people kind of um, thinking and behaving, and now you just more kind of feel sad about it. But I know that there can be a tendency to um, once you kind of like maybe step outside of a group and you look at it from outside, you can feel anger about it and want to just stay away from the group. Maybe stay in Canada. You say those a lot of those Japanese people, they're closed-minded. They're not growing. I don't want to be associated with. But so I think that it's neat that you're back in Japan and you're working, and I think that you can have a big influence on Japanese culture and people, and I'm excited to see like what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, I thank you. I mean, thank you. I think, first of all, I think two academic groups or like association were very, important to me. One is called the Society for Psychotherapy Research. It's
Mm.
called SPR.
Huh.
People there, really nurture, yeah, I mean, have a very good relationship with one another and treat
Mm.
the students in very respectful and nurturing manner. And, I love the way people work together internationally. And
Mm.
also, SEPI, Society for Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration, they are very open and, really trying to learn from one another.
Mm.
I mean, like when you say like, me becoming influential,
Uh-huh.
it kind of freezes me, like, do I want to be influential? I do think that it's good, I do want to influence, and that's why I do what I do.
Mm.
But I don't want to impose anything, but I would like to certainly give some kind of something so that people will, look at things differently,
Yeah. Yeah.
use it as an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Okay, I think this is a good place to end.
Great, great.
I want to thank you again very much for joining me. I've really enjoyed this
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah, me too. Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed talking with you.